You're listening to 360 Digital, a podcast brought to you by Mopinion's all-in-one user feedback software. This podcast series tackles a number of different topics under the digital umbrella, from best practices in UX and CRO to the latest trends and innovations in customer experience and digital marketing. This is 360 Digital. Hi guys, and welcome to our brand new podcast called 360 Digital. My name is Erin Gilliam, and I'm here with my co-host Luke Price. Hey Luke, how are you doing today?
Hey Erin, I'm doing well, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing all right. Hanging in there.
Good. Today we're going to be kicking off a brand new podcast series with a UX expert today, actually, who is going to talk about how digital enterprises can combine the qualitative and the quantitative data in practice for more powerful insights. So our special guest is going to dive into what users can expect to gain from leveraging these two types of data. How we can bring the quantitative and the qualitative data together, and also how different departments can respond to this data as well.
Yeah, but before we introduce our guest, let's take a closer look at qualitative and quantitative data. Now, as many of us often make assumptions when it comes to what our customers need and how they perceive the online experience. The problem with this approach, though, is that the vast majority of these ideas and assumptions that we're making are not based on anything. They're not based on hard data. That being said, we really need to make it our business to ensure that we're bringing data to the table that enables us to make the right decisions. And in order to do that, we need the right mix of quantitative and qualitative insights, because that'll not only clarify our next course of action, but it'll also minimize the risk of later changes.
Yeah, and also when we refer to quantitative data, obviously we're talking about the countable or the chartable data, I guess you call it, that we collect, so numbers, stats, percentages, things like that, and any other figures that are fixed and measurable are obviously considered quantitative. Obviously, qualitative data, on the other hand, is the data you need to help interpret these numbers. So this data gives us context into the hard numbers so that we and then the teams that we report to can all get an in-depth understanding of the factors that may be influencing the quantitative data. Essentially, the bottom line is both types of data, they bring out the best in each other. So it lessens ambiguity, it provides greater meaning for the user with both hard data and then context as well. The question is, of course, how could we collect and analyze this data in practice? And today's guest has some interesting insights and advice that might help you and your team navigate this issue. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce today's guest. That is Principal at Users Know, author of UX for Lean Startups and Build Better Products, and also host of the UX podcast, What is Wrong with UX? Laura Klein, hello.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, happy to have you. We're really excited to have you on the show today. Perhaps you can start off by sharing a little bit about yourself and how you got into the field of UX.
All of the things that Luke just said. I wrote some books, and I'm currently the principal of Users Know. And how I got into UX, I got into UX 8 million years ago when dinosaurs roamed the earth. Which is how it feels right about now. I'm actually a recovering engineer. I was an engineer in the late 90s when the web was sort of growing up, and I switched to UX back in the early 2000s. And, I did it the way that everybody did it back then, which was that we just all kind of thrashed around and learned stuff and learned from each other. And, in the way that people learn stuff when things are kind of brand new, like the web was.
Yeah, there was no playbook then.
No, people ask me, they're like, how can I get into UX like I did? I'm like, okay, first build a time machine, and then that's pretty much it. That's gonna be the hard part. Start with that.
Yeah. All right. Well, again, thanks for joining us today. And before we dive into this topic, we want to break the ice a little bit. Feel like our sound effects.
That was amazing.
Was that? Are you pouring me a drink? That's what that sounded like.
It sounds like it, doesn't it?
Sounds fantastic. I'm for it. Let's do this.
That's an excellent idea. So Laura, as part of our breaking the ice segment, we've got a quick question for you. You've probably heard of all the funny stories about people building home gyms, tie-dyeing their clothes, doing 10,000 piece puzzles, or, if you're me, buying excessive amounts of houseplants and then just letting them die. So our
Sure.
question for you is, what is the funniest thing you found yourself doing during quarantine?
Oh God. So here's the thing. I have been working from home off and on for years and years and years. And I live in the middle of nowhere on the top of a mountain. So quarantine has not been wildly different for me. It's still super weird, and I still, I know it's been incredibly hard on a lot of people, but as a person who is about 97% shut in anyway, um it's been not that big of a difference. That said, I did take up embroidery.
Embroidery. Interesting.
Yeah, don't do it a lot, but some, but I mean, just the normal. I could say like, oh, I started playing a lot of Animal Crossing, which I absolutely did, and I 100% would have anyway. So I don't really know that I can blame that on quarantine.
And what is that, Animal Crossing?
Yeah, it's a game for children.
Oh, okay. I'm not familiar.
It's a Nintendo video game for children where you live on an island with a bunch of animals. That's it. That's the whole thing. I'm telling you, yes, and now I am going to blame that on quarantine because that is why I am doing it. Yeah.
There you go.
That's right.
Perfect. Well, good answer. And how about you, Luke? Do you have anything weird that you've been doing during quarantine?
Yeah, trying to juggle work and children. I think that's been the main challenge. My wife was still working at her work location throughout that time because of the nature of her job. But yeah, that left me then at home being like daddy daycare, multitasking, trying to do everything at once, and I'm getting better.
Yeah, gotten a lot of practice.
Yeah, it's going well.
Alrighty, well, that concludes our Breaking the Ice segment. So, Laura, let's just go ahead and get started. I think for most of our listeners, it's pretty clear, it's not really a matter of whether or not we should be using quantitative or qualitative data, but it's more a matter of how we can fuse this data together, to get more richer, actionable insights. So let's start out by taking a closer look at each type of data. Our first question for you is, what can users expect to get out of their quantitative data? So what are the benefits of using this? And same goes for qualitative data.
Yeah, so I'm going to say the same thing that I've been saying since about 2009, I think, when I started writing about this particular topic, which is quantitative tells you what is going on, and qualitative tells you why it is happening. And that's it in a nutshell. You can, if you're looking at your quant data, you're looking at your numbers, you can see all sorts of interesting patterns. So and so, or not even so and so. You shouldn't really be tracking people to the individual. We're talking about ethically sourced quantitative and qualitative data here. Let's just be real clear about that. Collect it well. Be respectful of people's privacy. But that said, you're looking at how, what percentage of people made it through your funnel? What percentage of people who looked at a product bought the product? Those sorts of things. What percentage of people who, you sent this particular message to were interested in that message and, have responded positively. These are all good things to know when you're trying to make decisions about your product. That said, let's say that you send somebody a message. They seem to get very excited about it. You don't know. You send 1,000 people your email, and a bunch of them click on it, and then nobody buys the product. So there you've got some quantitative data. You know that message was great at getting people to do something, but not to do necessarily the thing you want them to do. Why is that?
Right.
I think that is sort of the key question, because I think a lot of people sort of stop there at that didn't work. And then they were like, well, we'll try something else. Well, hold on. Maybe not quite yet. Maybe figure out why it didn't work. Did it not work because it was unclear? Did it not work because, it turned out that it was actually promising something that it wasn't delivering? Did it not work because, people hated the product or didn't know how to buy the product? Was there a bug? You don't know. Figure it out. How do you figure it out? You actually have to talk to people. I'm sorry. I know that that's the hard part, but that's the step. You have to watch people do things and talk to them and understand why they made the decisions they made. And that's qualitative data. You can't just think that you know the answer and try new things. I mean, you can. It just takes much, much, much longer and often doesn't work.
How do these two types of data come together to really give us, a more holistic view of the user experience then?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I like to look for patterns in both the quantitative and the qualitative. And the interesting thing for me is that I like, depending on what I'm trying to learn about my user, and I'm always trying to sort of learn more things about my user and my product, because that's how we make things better. Uh, I like to spend a lot of time thinking about what I'm trying to learn and figure out the best way to learn it. So, is the thing that I am trying to learn basically a what is actually going on, or is the thing that I am trying to learn a why? So, like I said, I'm looking at patterns in data. I can start from quant or qual. I can start, like I said, if I'm looking at, for example, optimizing a funnel, right? You start from the quant. You already have a funnel in place. You're going to start from the quantitative. You're going to say, which part of this funnel do I want to optimize, right? And the funny thing is that I know a lot of user experience designers who, I mean, I'm just going to say, I love them. They're some of my best friends. But a lot of them will start, we need to optimize this. We need to optimize this onboarding. Let's go out and start, immediately doing qualitative research and understanding why people are onboarding, all of that. That's great. Like, you can absolutely do that. But you're ignoring the fact that you already have an onboarding process in place. And a really good thing to do is to look at it and see, is it working already?
Right.
If it's already working, then the right answer might be go work on something else. If it's not working, where isn't it working? Why don't we focus on the places where it isn't working? So that's starting from the quant. You're looking at your patterns in your data and saying, okay, this thing is happening. That's odd, and I don't like it. How am I going to fix it? Okay, let's go out and try to run some qualitative research, fairly targeted, to understand why. On the other end of the spectrum, maybe you don't have a product yet, or maybe you do have a product, but you're kind of like, yeah, we really want to make things better for users, or we want to, for example, move into an adjacent market, right? We want to find a new kind of user who's really interested in using this product, but we don't really know how. That's a really common thing that people come and ask me about. That's qualitative. You go out, you talk to some people, talk to a lot of people in that case, right? You start talking to people who use competitor products, or start talking to people who use your product. Or if you don't have a product yet, you start talking to people in your target market. I want to do something for accountants. Hey, maybe start by talking to some accountants. Maybe figure out what they need, what they're like, whether there's massive differences in the different kinds of accountants. Hey, it turns out there are. So there's all these different kinds of qualitative research. And again, qualitative research isn't really, we talk about just like, it's just going and talking to people. It isn't. There's massive numbers of different kinds of methodologies that you can use, and that'll all help you learn different stuff. But essentially what you're learning is really you're learning about the person, about the user, about their context, about their needs and their goals and their behaviors. And that's so incredibly powerful for coming up with, some brand new thing that's going to really wow them, or that's going to really solve a problem for them.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. And then I was going to say, sorry,
Sure.
and then you use the quantitative data from there to see if you were right. It's, you have to go like, oh, I'm sure this is going to do it, and then you launch it into the middle of, you launch it to your users, and they're like, we don't care. That's when you can kind of see that from the quantitative. Hopefully that doesn't happen. If you do your qualitative right, I will say this right now, that I don't care moment happens less often. I will not say it never happens, but I will say it happens less often if you've done your qualitative right.
Funny.
Okay, and so these are a lot of maybe a few offline examples and stuff, but from a more practical perspective, and I'm backtracking here a little bit, how should digital enterprises then go about collecting these types of data? So which quantitative metrics should they be using, and what kinds of qualitative data could be coupled with these metrics?
It depends on what you want to learn. And all the stuff that I've been talking about, honestly, is much easier to collect for digital products. So, although it applies to everything. So, it's actually quite hard to collect quantitative data on non-digital products, because, how do you do that? If something isn't connected. All that you know is maybe like, did you sell more of the unit? But that's got a whole different set of metrics that you have to look at that are just an absolute nightmare. And I'm sorry for anybody who has to do that. It's very hard. But for digital products, things like onboarding flows, things like conversion to purchasing an item, in an e-commerce shop, things like that. You're collecting your funnel data, right? You're collecting the data of what was the trigger that we sent them to try to get them to do the behavior? What was the behavior that they actually did? Sometimes you're looking at leading metrics, right? That people who come and look at the site 4 times on average, by 20% more. I'm making numbers up. These are not actual numbers. I mean, they're actual numbers, but they don't apply to anything. But in your particular case, if you're noticing things like people who come to the site 4 times and look at the same thing, they're more 20% more likely to buy it. Okay, fantastic. That's a leading metric. You can look at that to sort of predict behavior in the future. You have to be real careful with those kinds of numbers. I have a lot of stuff in my books about how people can game leading metrics, so that's a nightmare. But those are all things you have to do. As far as qualitative, there are lots of digital ways to connect with people to collect qualitative data. You could do remote user research. You can have phone calls work real well. I hear this thing called Zoom pretty big right now.
Absolutely.
A lot of ways to connect with people. There are other ways. You can have people do diary studies. You can, or you can do the in-person stuff. Pandemic willing, you can go and do actual in-person research. But qualitative involves talking to people, so there has to be some connection, some human connection. Either talking to people or collecting more analog data.
And of course, collecting this data, that's just part of the equation. So how would these organizations be able to mesh this data and really create like more actionable insights out of it then?
So tons of different ways. Again, I'm going to be super UX-y here and say it depends. And then I'll tell you what it depends on. So I think that there are, what we call this in UX is we call this the analysis and synthesis portion of, sort of the design process, right? Where you take all of your data, whatever it is, right? Qualitative, quantitative, you take all of it, you analyze it, you synthesize it. There are 8,000, I'm guessing, methods for doing analysis and synthesis, where you take the different types of data and you distill it down into its sort of atomic bits, and you look for patterns in it. The problem, again, is that it's going to depend on what you want to do. So if you're looking at, I'm going to keep talking about conversion funnels because they're really easy to understand. If you're looking at a conversion funnel, the thing that I personally like the particular type of analysis and synthesis I like to do in conversion funnels is I like to draw a picture of a funnel on a whiteboard and talk about the different steps in the funnel, and those will vary. I have this exercise in my book, Build Better Products. What steps are people going through in the funnel or in the onboarding flow or whatever it is. And I like to actually put the numbers by each step. So 100% of people got the email, 20% of people clicked on it, 10% of those people did something else on the site, whatever it is that you're looking at, right? And I like to look at that whole funnel all the way down to the end and then sort of visualize where people are falling out of it. Then I can go, oh, wow, this particular drop-off was really significant. We should figure out why that is. So that's a good, think about ways to visualize your data that will help you see places that you're getting something that's significant, that you're getting something that is unexpected. Other things you can do, you can create, journey maps or, like journey maps of your customer's entire life cycle and all the touch points. And you can start to look at, for example, sentiment analysis of how they're feeling at those different points. And you can get that information from various different products. Again, look for the ethically sourced ones, or you can get it from doing qualitative research. So you're combining that, like here's what people are doing. Here are the different touch points of the user's journey. Here's how they're feeling at that different point. If they're having to call into customer service at this point, what are their feelings? What are they calling about? What are the things that they're, what is happening at this point? What is what is the what there? And how are they feeling about it? And how do I improve that experience for them? So the idea is for me to get some kind of visual of what is going on with the user and what you want to go on, and then start to, put in incorporate the other kind of data. I don't really know any other way to put it. Unfortunately, this is a very visual thing, and we're doing it on a podcast, which doesn't help. But creating maps and putting numbers on the maps is a super good way of visualizing something and saying, "Oh man, there's this really big drop off right here, and that's the thing we should pay attention to."
Yeah. Yeah, cool. Makes sense. Interesting stuff. And I got a question that's, I guess, perhaps a bit more specific in a way. Our listeners, they're mostly active in digital marketing, yeah, for websites and or for apps as well. So online marketers, CRO specialists, UX specialists as well, of course. But yeah, are there the differences between normal web and then mobile in relation to collecting and analyzing this quantitative and qualitative data? So
Yeah.
that the tool's been used, screen size issues with
Yep.
mobile devices, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, no, there's tons of different. Mostly that I mean the big ones that you there are those that matter some. There are a bunch of other things that let's see. There was a great masterclass for this that was taught. I think you can still get it. It's still online for the Interaction Design Foundation that I just watched about mobile, and it was done by somebody that I will send you later. I will send you a link to it. It was really good. But he talked about all sorts of really interesting things, including the fact that, for example, when you're dealing with mobile, not only do you have, it's not just screen size, right? It's actually like you get all kinds of other information from the device. I'm not a huge fan of tracking everybody's location down to the last second. That's not a thing that I'm personally interested in. But you do understand things like, how often they're, like, are they coming back and they're using it every few seconds? Like, are they, are they actually mobile? Are they moving around? Is it the kind of thing that they only use, in places where they don't have good data, where there's a ton of latency? There's all kinds, are they losing internet constantly? There's all kinds of really contextual data that you can use to make the product better, which is helpful. And so that is a big difference between web and mobile. I mean, also just the kinds of data that you can collect are somewhat different. And I kind of hate giving specifics on that because that changes so often, honestly. And the tools to do that change wildly. And I haven't done it, this year or last year. So I kind of feel like any data that I would give you about the specific thing is probably wildly out of date.
That was actually going to be my next question. I was going to say, do you have any particular user cases that you can share? But yeah,
here's the problem with stuff like that is that it changes really quickly, and the capabilities of this stuff change so quickly that I'm really always more comfortable talking about the general, because the general stuff doesn't change at all, right? Like, figure out what you want to do and what you want to learn, and then go look at whatever tools are available right now. The really interesting thing is, even though I have used lots of these tools in the past, there are probably 16 new ones that came out last week that I haven't looked at, and I'm not going to look at it because I'm comfortable with the tool set that I use. So anytime that you get comfortable with anything, you're immediately out of date. Keep looking.
It makes sense. Because you're right. I suppose, like you say, by the time you give an example, it's gone out of date and things have moved on anyway.
It's really funny. There's I mean, you obviously know about the term growth hacking, and I a little bit know the guy who kind of came up with it, and it was always sort of fascinating to me, because to me it always just sort of meant being good at marketing and also at analytics, but it kind of turned into a lot of people sharing all of these kind of hacky secrets for like, oh, if you do this and this and this. But to me, the most effective ones were the ones where, and to the guy who started it, the most effective ones were the ones that weren't just, I'm copying somebody else's cool trick to get everybody to convert, that I'm using this particular template, or I'm, sending emails at this particular time. It was the ones that worked were the kind of new ones where somebody came up with something sort of new and a new way of looking at data and a new way of talking to people and really understood their user and their market and found a way to really connect with them. And then that's still the best way to do stuff. Just copying other people's, methods, I think, is suboptimal. Let's put it that way.
No, be inventive is better, I guess.
Be inventive, but like within the context of really understanding your users and your product, and the thing that appeals to your users is not going to be the thing that appeals to my users if we're building entirely different things, right?
Yeah, true.
And in fact, my users might think the stuff that your users love is terrible, or vice versa. So it matters.
Yeah, makes sense, definitely. I'm just looking at the time because it is flying. I think we've got time for one more, because there's one more question I do want to ask, which I hope we can fit in. And that is that, different, like what you're talking about, different people respond to different forms of data. So how might you advise teams to follow up on these insights and communicate, results to stakeholders? So, for example, the CFO of an organization might be, more interested in the quantitative side of something, whereas your head of sales might be looking at, the emotional side and, looking at data that drives his or her team's positioning.
Yeah. So are you talking about, are you talking about within your company, how you're communicating these stories to people, or are you talking about the different kinds of people in your market or
so more internally, indeed, more
internally? Okay. Yeah. So yes, some people like numbers, some people like stories, or like emotion. That is true. However, we're all human and we all like stories. This is true. So, and numbers tell great stories, and videos tell great stories, and really connecting with people tells great stories. One of the things that I have found to be the very most effective way of combining stuff, and it's the hardest, unfortunately, but there are lots of tools now that kind of help you do it. Let's say that you are trying to explain a giant drop-off in a particular funnel or process, right? You got some kind of linear process and you're trying to explain the drop-off. My favorite way of telling that story is to show the overall funnel, like this is what we're trying to achieve. Show the big drop-off, this is the giant chasm where people are falling into. And then show people's actual experiences with video roll, short little clips of video roll, of people encountering that thing or talking about that thing or sharing their experiences or talking about how horrible it was. These are so unbelievably impactful to anybody. I don't care if they like numbers. I don't care if they like stories or people or emotion or whatever. You're basically saying, like, see these 5 people that we took videos of that are talking about this thing, and see how emotional and upset that they're getting about this thing. That's causing this number that you care about, CFO. That's causing this number to crash. So I know that you care about the number, but you need to care about the people, because numbers are people.
Yeah.
Numbers come from people. So and the great thing about that is that then you not just have the number, like I said, the number doesn't get you anything. The number just gets you a place to go look. It also then gets you a direction to go to improve the number.
Yeah. No, good one. And I think, as you say, you tell a story, and you use visuals within that story. Yeah, you're right. Anybody is going to buy into it that way, rather than just putting a graph down or something with a certain trend or whatever on it. I mean, it might evoke a reaction, but you're not gonna.
You have to do that too. You have to do that too. Like, here's the thing that you care about, right? Like, we all care about this number because this number is why we get paychecks. We also all care about these people because these people and their experiences are what is making this number happen. Mm-hmm. So this is how we fix it. Now, of course, in one or the other case, you might focus more on one or the other. But again, what does the number tell you other than, hey, look, it went up, hooray?
Yeah.
I mean, and that might be enough. Like, if it's actually going up. If it's not, then you might need some of the other stuff.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that those those stories and experiences and things like that really speaks to people a lot easier than just showing them a number on a chart or something.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, love charts. You know, nobody, you're not going to find a lot of people who like a pivot table more than I do. I'm a huge nerd when it comes to this stuff, but also I do understand that humans like, I don't know, understanding other humans for some reason. So we got to do that too.
Yeah. So as Luke said, we're kind of running out of time here. So yeah, I think we'll wrap things up and say, Laura, thank you for joining us and taking time to help us out with our first podcast today. It's been great having you.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've given us a lot to think about, I think, and hopefully also for our listeners, some useful advice and how they can really fuse these two types of data together in practice.
I learned some things as well, not just listeners.
Did you know?
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Laura.
You're more than welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thanks.
We hope you've enjoyed today's episode, and we're looking forward to bringing you much more exciting content here on 360 Digital. Thanks for listening, and be sure to tune in for a brand new episode next month.